Imagine building a magnificent sandcastle, year after year, moment by moment. Each grain of sand a promise kept, a vulnerable truth shared, a time you knew someone had your back. Now picture a sudden, devastating wave, crashing down from the one person you thought would defend that precious castle with their life. In a heartbeat, it's all gone, turned to wet, empty sand. And you realize it wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate, calculated demolition. This isn't just about feeling let down. It's that gut-wrenching moment when you see the loyalty you built your world on was just a story, a carefully crafted illusion, like a movie set designed to look real, but with nothing solid behind it. He promised he'd be true, that your bond was unbreakable. But his actions, they revealed a betrayal so deep it didn't just crack your trust, it made it vanish like smoke through your fingers, leaving nothing but emptiness where faith used to be. This is a story about how an ultimate betrayal like that didn't just crack a life in two, like an earthquake splitting the ground, but changed its entire future, teaching a lesson about people that's so brutal it echoes forever. Trust. We say it all the time, don't we? Maybe so much that we forget how heavy, how truly important it is, like the air we breathe. Essential, but often unnoticed until it's gone. But when you've really, truly put all your trust in someone, it's like breathing the freshest, cleanest mountain air. It's that unspoken deal, that quiet promise that says, I get you, I value you, and I won't deliberately hurt you. It's the bedrock foundation of any real connection, whether it's the fierce bond between old friends, the dedicated teamwork in a business built on dreams and a whole lot of coffee, or the safe, intimate space of a romantic relationship. Take Sarah and Mark. Theirs wasn't just a story of colleagues. It was like a rich tapestry woven with shared dreams, late-night brainstorming sessions powered by cheap coffee and endless optimism, and a friendship that had already seen them through tough times and early wins. They were the co-founders of Innovatech, a small tech startup with big dreams of changing their little corner of the world. Sarah was the visionary, the coder, the real heart of their new ideas. Mark? He was the charismatic strategist, the guy who could network, the voice that sold their dream to everyone. Their roles fit together perfectly, like two essential pieces of a complex machine. They relied on each other, completely. Sarah had known Mark since university. He was the one who'd had her back when a huge project almost blew up in her face, the one who'd always pushed her to chase her wildest ideas. We're a team, Sarah, he'd say so often, his eyes looking so sincere, his smile so easy to believe. Your brains, my hustle, we're unstoppable. And she believed him. Why wouldn't she? Every laugh they'd shared, every challenge they'd overcome, every quiet moment of just getting each other had been like a deposit in the bank of trust. This trust wasn't just part of their business, it was their business. It was the invisible framework holding up their shared future. A future Sarah had poured not just her savings and her smarts into, but her complete faith. She believed in their dream, sure, but even more, she believed in Mark. This faith was her compass, her comfort when things got shaky. It let her be open, to share her newest, most valuable ideas without a second thought. That foundation felt like solid rock, strong, unshakable, forever. Little did she know, she was living in a beautiful cage, all gold on the outside, but built on sand, just waiting for a wave of deceit she couldn't even imagine to wash it all away. She thought their personal connection made their professional bond unbreakable, like rebar reinforcing concrete. That belief, so pure and deeply held, would soon become the very thing that caused her the most terrible pain. Betrayal rarely shows up with a bang, like a sudden thunderclap. Usually, it's more like a tiny shift in the air, a faint, almost unnoticeable tremor before the real earthquake hits. It doesn't start with a big fight, but with small, unsettling things that don't quite add up. Tiny cracks in that smooth surface of loyalty. For Sarah, the first clues were like whispers in a noisy room, easy to brush off, to explain away. It started when Mark got more and more secretive about some of the money stuff. Innovatech had just gotten a big chunk of seed funding, a win that was mostly down to Mark's killer pitches. Suddenly, there were new expenses, new accounts, and Mark, who handled the finances, would give her vague answers when she asked for details, like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. "Just strategic move, Sarah," he'd say, a bit too fast, a bit too smooth. "Don't you worry your brilliant head about the boring numbers. You just focus on the next big thing." For a while, she let it go. After all, trust was what they were built on. Why question the guy who'd always been their biggest cheerleader? Then came the missed meetings, the calls that went straight to voicemail, followed by weak excuses later on. Projects that Mark was supposed to be handling started to drag. Deadlines began to slip. When she pushed him on it, he'd blame outside problems. A shaky market, difficult clients, a whole smokescreen of believable excuses. Still, a knot of unease started to tighten in Sarah's stomach, like a slowly coiling snake. You know that feeling you try to ignore? The one where you tell yourself you're just being paranoid, that stress is making you see shadows that aren't there? It's common for a breach of faith in relationships to begin with these kinds of seemingly small things, like broken promises or someone not pulling their weight. Mark had promised transparency. He'd promised they'd share the load. These little slips felt like tiny fractures in their agreement, hairline cracks appearing in a precious vase. She remembered one time specifically. A really important follow-up meeting with a potential investor, one Mark had sworn he'd handle himself, got missed. The investor, obviously annoyed, called Sarah directly. Mark's excuse was a sudden family emergency, one she couldn't really check. His apology felt scripted, like it was missing its usual genuineness. Sarah found herself covering for him, smoothing things over while that knot of anxiety just got tighter. It was easier to believe his story, to keep things as they were, than to face the terrifying idea that the Mark she knew, the partner she trusted with everything, might actually be deliberately hiding things. This is often when the person being betrayed is fighting an internal battle, wanting to believe versus that nagging, unwelcome suspicion, like trying to ignore a persistent, troubling sound. The mind is pretty good at tricking itself when the truth is just too painful to face. Sarah was, without knowing it, standing on the edge, the ground beneath her starting to give way, one small, sneaky crack at a time. Those tiny cracks started to spread, like a spider web across the once solid surface of Sarah's trust, growing wider and more ominous. The unsettling whispers grew into a roar of doubt she just couldn't ignore anymore. Mark's vagueness turned into outright secrecy. Financial reports became harder to get her hands on, and when she did, they were full of strange things that Mark would either brush off or get weirdly defensive about, like a cornered animal. "Are you questioning my integrity now, Sarah?" he'd snap, turning it around on her, making her feel guilty for her growing unease. This kind of manipulation, this subtle way of making her doubt herself, was a new, chilling twist. Sarah, driven by a horrible, gnawing fear, started to do her own quiet digging. Those late nights, once spent coding and dreaming up new ideas, were now filled with her hunched-over bank statements, investor emails, and project plans, like a detective piecing together a disturbing puzzle. And what she started to find wasn't a pattern of bad management, but of careful, planned deception. Money that was supposed to go to research and development was being moved to accounts she'd never heard of. Key documents about their intellectual property, the very heart and soul of Innovatech, showed signs that Mark had accessed and copied them, breaking all their agreed rules. The emotional toll was huge. Sleep? That was a luxury, often interrupted by unsettling dreams. Her days were filled with a sickening anxiety. The joy she used to find in her work was gone, replaced by a heavy sense of dread, like a dark... Mark had promised transparency. He'd promised they'd share the load. These little slips felt like tiny fractures in their agreement, hairline cracks appearing in a precious vase. She remembered one time specifically, a really important follow-up meeting with a potential investor, one Mark had sworn he'd handle himself, got missed. The investor, obviously annoyed, called Sarah directly. Mark's excuse was a sudden family emergency, one she couldn't really check. His apology felt scripted, like it was missing its usual genuineness. Sarah found herself covering for him, smoothing things over, while that knot of anxiety just got tighter. It was easier to believe his story, to keep things as they were, than to face the terrifying idea that the Mark she knew, the partner she trusted with everything, might actually be deliberately hiding things. This is often when the person being betrayed is fighting an internal battle, wanting to believe versus that nagging, unwelcome suspicion, like trying to ignore a persistent, troubling sound. The mind is pretty good at tricking itself when the truth is just too painful to face. Sarah was, without knowing it, standing on the edge, the ground beneath her starting to give way, one small, sneaky crack at a time. Those tiny cracks started to spread, like a spider web across the once solid surface of Sarah's trust, growing wider and more ominous. The unsettling whispers grew into a roar of doubt she just couldn't ignore anymore. Mark's vagueness turned into outright secrecy. Financial reports became harder to get her hands on, and when she did, they were full of strange things that Mark would either brush off or get weirdly defensive about, like a cornered animal. "Are you questioning my integrity now, Sarah?" He'd snap, turning it around on her, making her feel guilty for her growing unease. This kind of manipulation, this subtle way of making her doubt herself, was a new, chilling twist. Sarah, driven by a horrible, gnawing fear, started to do her own quiet digging. Those late nights, once spent coding and dreaming up new ideas, were now filled with her hunched-over bank statements, investor emails, and project plans, like a detective piecing together a disturbing puzzle. And what she started to find wasn't a pattern of bad management, but of careful, planned deception. Money that was supposed to go to research and development was being moved to accounts she'd never heard of. Key documents about their intellectual property, the very heart and soul of Innovatech, showed signs that Mark had accessed and copied them, breaking all their agreed rules. The emotional toll was huge. Sleep? That was a luxury, often interrupted by unsettling dreams. Her days were filled with a sickening anxiety. The joy she used to find in her work was gone, replaced by a heavy sense of dread, like a dark cloud constantly overhead. How could the person she'd built dreams with, the friend she'd leaned on, be doing this? Every new discovery was like another stab of pain, the knife twisting deeper. This is the stage where the betrayal gets worse and the victim has to face the horrifying truth that this isn't an accident, it's on purpose. She remembered one particularly chilling moment. She found an email chain between Mark and a competitor, a company they'd both always badmouthed for its shady practices. The emails were written in a kind of code, but the meaning was sickeningly clear. Mark was talking about parts of their unique algorithm, the core invention Sarah had poured years of her life into. The subject line looked innocent enough. Future synergies. But the content? It was anything but. It talked about a transition and new opportunities. It felt like reading her own professional death notice written by her closest friend. The man she shared coffee with every morning, who knew her biggest hopes and fears, was systematically tearing down everything they had built, everything she cared about, like a termite slowly eating away at the foundations of a house. The friendship, the shared laughter, the promises of loyalty, it all started to feel like an elaborate act. Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under her feet. The betrayal wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a monstrous truth, rearing its ugly head, and she knew the worst was still to come. Her inner world was a mess, a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and a deep, heart-wrenching sadness. The Mark she knew was vanishing, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. The breaking point, that moment when your whole world turns upside down and everything just shatters, is rarely one clean hit, like a single strike of lightning. For Sarah, it was a terrifying buildup, a flood of revelations that hit her with brutal, relentless force, leading to a confrontation that would be burned into her memory forever. She'd gathered undeniable proof of Mark's treachery. The illegal money transfers, the copied ideas, the emails with competitors, it was like assembling pieces of a bomb. Sarah knew she couldn't stay quiet any longer. If she did, she'd just be a sitting duck while he destroyed her life's work and her financial future. She set up a meeting with Mark in their office, the place that had once been their sanctuary of shared dreams, now feeling more like the stage for an unavoidable tragedy. She laid out the evidence on the polished boardroom table, printouts and statements creating a damning picture of his betrayal. Her voice, though shaking, was firm. "Mark," she began, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, "I know what you've been doing." The change in Mark was instant and terrifying. The charming, friendly mask he usually wore just melted away like wax near a flame, replaced by a cold, hard indifference that was far more chilling than any explosion of anger could ever be. There was no denial, no stuttered excuses, not even a flicker of regret in his eyes. Instead, there was a calm, almost arrogant admission. "So, you finally figured it out," he said, his voice flat, empty of any emotion. "Took you longer than I thought." The casual cruelty of his words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a momentary slip-up, a mistake he was sorry for. This was calculated, deliberate, and worst of all, he felt no remorse. It was as if he was a chess master, revealing he'd been playing a different, ruthless game all along. "But why, Mark?" she asked, the question a desperate cry for an explanation, for some piece of the man she thought she knew. "Everything we built, our friendship." He leaned back in his chair, a faint, cynical smile on his lips. "Business is business, Sarah. Friendship? That was just a way to get what I wanted. You were brilliant, yeah, but naive. You created the good stuff. I just knew how to use it for myself. Innovatech was always just a stepping stone for me, not the final stop." Every word was like a shard of ice, stabbing her in the heart. He went on to explain, with chilling calm, how he'd been siphoning off funds for months to start his own, separate company, using her intellectual property as its foundation. He had systematically trashed her reputation with key investors, painting her as unstable and difficult while making himself look like the stable, visionary leader. He had basically stolen her dream, her work, and her future, all while looking her in the eye and talking about loyalty. The sheer size of the deception, the depth of his cynicism, it was overwhelming, like discovering the beautiful house they'd built together was actually a facade with a hidden, rotten core. It wasn't just the business that was destroyed. It was her faith in her own judgment, her ability to trust anyone, her very understanding of how people connect. This was the ultimate breach of faith, the point where trust wasn't just broken, it was obliterated. The room seemed to spin. The promises of loyalty, the shared history, the years of friendship, all of it had been a lie, a performance. In that moment, Sarah understood what irreversible consequences truly meant. Nothing could ever be the same. The foundation hadn't just crumbled. It was revealed to have never really been there at all. The man in front of her was a stranger, a predator who had worn the disguise of a friend. The betrayal was absolute, the shattering complete. Going through Sarah's experience with this ultimate betrayal is a stark reminder of just how devastating it can be when trust is broken like this. If her story, or parts of it, hit home for you, maybe you faced your own moments where trust was shattered, or you're dealing with the tough questions of loyalty and deceit in your own life. I'd love for you to share your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments below. Sometimes hearing from others can shine a new light or just make you feel understood. And if you're finding the story compelling and want to explore more about the complicated, often difficult sides of human nature and relationships, please think about subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on future explorations. Your engagement really helps build a community around these important conversations. Now, let's get back to Sarah's story and see what happened after this catastrophic betrayal. That confrontation with Mark wasn't an ending. It was the violent start of a new, bleak reality for Sarah, like waking up in a desolate, unfamiliar land after a storm. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of legal fights, financial disaster, and an emotional devastation that's hard to put into words. Innovatech, once a shining beacon of promise, collapsed under the weight of Mark's fraud and the scandal that followed. The dream they'd built together was now just a public mess of deceit. Those irreversible consequences became Sarah's everyday life. Personally, the emotional pain was immense. Sleep didn't bring any escape, only reruns of Mark's cold confession, his casual destruction of their shared past. The sense of being violated was huge. It felt like a core part of her had been stolen. Her trust in her own ability to read people shattered, as if her internal compass for judging character had been deliberately broken. How could she have been so blind? This self-blame, which so often comes with betrayal, ate away at her. The feeling of being profoundly tricked, of her own good faith being turned into a weapon against her, was a heavy weight to carry. Experiences like this can really shake your self-worth, lead to depression, and plant a deep-seated mistrust that can affect future relationships. Professionally, Sarah's world was in ruins. Mark, with his stolen funds and her intellectual property, quickly launched his new company, built right on top of Innovatech's ashes, like a vulture feasting on a carcass. He'd managed to twist the story, subtly at first, then more openly, to make Sarah look incompetent or unstable, making his departure seem like a necessary move. The legal battles to get her intellectual property back and try to get some compensation were long, expensive, and emotionally exhausting. It was a lonely fight, as some people in the industry, either believing Mark's story or just wanting to avoid the drama, kept their distance. The breakdown of her social and professional connections was quick and brutal. The betrayal didn't just hit her, it rippled outwards, like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating waves that spread far and wide. Innovatech employees lost their jobs. Investors, who had believed in their joint vision, lost their money, their faith in new ventures probably a little shaken too. This shows how a major breach of faith isn't just a private hurt.
It can damage an entire network. The legal consequences for Mark were slow in coming. The justice system often struggles to keep up with complicated white-collar crimes and intellectual property theft. Even if legal justice was eventually served, it couldn't undo the core damage: the destruction of something built with passion and the complete annihilation of trust. Sarah found herself trying to navigate a wasteland where everything familiar now felt dangerous. The betrayal had far-reaching effects, sometimes leading to what's called a betrayal spillover effect, where one deep betrayal can make you lose trust in others, even in totally different situations, like one drop of potent poison making you suspicious of the entire well. She became more wary, more guarded. The open, optimistic innovator was forced to pull back, to build walls where there used to be bridges. The vibrant future she had imagined was now a barren landscape, shadowed by the long, dark figure of Mark's deceit. The destruction wasn't just financial or professional, it was an attack on her spirit, leaving scars that, unlike financial losses, might never truly go away. The promise of loyalty had been replaced by the stark reality of a calculated, soul-crushing betrayal, and its consequences would echo for years. In the empty quiet that follows a massive betrayal, when the dust of your shattered beliefs starts to settle, what's left is the painful, unforgettable lesson. For Sarah, this lesson wasn't something she read in a book or heard in a lecture. It was burned into her by the fire of Mark's treachery. It was a deep, agonizing education in the darker sides of people, and in the true, fragile nature of trust itself. The first, and maybe the most brutal lesson, was the chilling realization that what you see on the surface can be completely, devastatingly wrong. Mark, the charming friend, the loyal partner, had been a carefully constructed act, a beautiful facade hiding a rotten interior. The destruction wasn't just financial or professional, it was an attack on her spirit, leaving scars that, unlike financial losses, might never truly go away. The promise of loyalty had been replaced by the stark reality of a calculated, soul-crushing betrayal, and its consequences would echo for years. In the empty quiet that follows a massive betrayal, When the dust of your shattered beliefs starts to settle, what's left is the painful, unforgettable lesson. For Sarah, this lesson wasn't something she read in a book or heard in a lecture. It was burned into her by the fire of Mark's treachery. It was a deep, agonizing education in the darker sides of people, and in the true, fragile nature of trust itself. The first, and maybe the most brutal lesson, was the chilling realization that what you see on the surface can be completely, devastatingly wrong. Mark, the charming friend, the loyal partner, had been a carefully constructed act, a beautiful facade hiding a rotten interior. Behind the warm smiles and sincere promises was a capacity for cold, calculated cruelty she could never have imagined. This taught her that some people aren't just capable of lying, they're masters of it, wearing masks of sincerity while they chase their own selfish goals with ruthless precision. It was a harsh wake-up call to the reality that not everyone plays fair, that some people see vulnerability not as something to protect, but as a chance to exploit. Another painful lesson was about trust itself. Sarah had always thought of trust as a strong bond, something that, once formed, could handle pressure. She learned, in the most brutal way possible, that trust, while incredibly powerful, is also incredibly fragile. Like a delicate glass sculpture built with care, beautiful to behold, yet a single betraying blow can shatter it into a million irreparable pieces. You can spend years building it, piece by piece, but it can be demolished in a second by a single, profound act of betrayal.
And once it's shattered that badly, it's almost impossible to fully put back together, at least not in its original, innocent form. For Sarah, the world was now seen through a scarred lens. Every new person she met, every potential partnership, would inevitably be measured against what Mark had done. This constant watchfulness, while a necessary defense, was also a source of sadness, a constant reminder of what she'd lost, her natural ability to trust freely and openly. Coping was a slow, tough process. There were days filled with anger, others with a deep, hollow grief. The idea of forgiveness or redemption felt distant, almost meaningless, when faced with such calculated malice. How could there be redemption for someone who showed no remorse, who saw their betrayal simply as a smart business move? For Sarah, the path forward wasn't about forgiving Mark, at least not at first. It was about pulling herself out of the wreckage, like a survivor emerging from a collapsed building. It meant facing the pain, the anger, the feeling of having been played for a fool, without letting those emotions completely take over. It meant slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding her sense of self-worth, which had taken a massive hit. She learned that true strength isn't about never falling or never being tricked. It's about the courage to get back up, to piece together the broken bits of a shattered life, even if the cracks always remain, like a reassembled vase that still tells the story of its breaking. The painful lesson in human nature wasn't that everyone is untrustworthy, but that profound deceit is possible, and that you have to develop wisdom alongside openness. It was a lesson in being discerning, in looking beyond the surface, in understanding that loyalty given isn't always loyalty returned. The experience, while devastating, forced a kind of growth, a harder, more cynical wisdom, perhaps, but wisdom all the same. Her innocence was gone, replaced by scar tissue that, while a testament to her wound, also spoke of her survival. The betrayal had indeed destroyed everything in her old world, but in its place, a new, warier, but ultimately resilient Sarah began to emerge, forever changed by the ultimate breach of faith. Sarah's story, while deeply personal in its awful details, really echoes something we all can understand: the profound pain of betrayal. It's a story that hits home across cultures, across time, because the need to trust, and the agony when that trust is violated, are fundamental parts of being human. Whether it's a partner cheating, a friend being disloyal, a business associate deceiving you, or even institutions we once believed in letting us down, a breach of faith cuts right to our core, like an unexpected tremor that shakes the very ground we stand on. It makes us face uncomfortable truths about our own vulnerability, about other people's capacity for deceit, and sometimes, about our own naivety or misplaced trust. This idea of a breach of faith is powerful and recognized everywhere, in our personal lives, in religious beliefs, in legal systems, and throughout history. In personal life, as Sarah found out,
it leads to emotional trauma, a loss of security, and a fractured sense of who you are. The betrayal doesn't just end the relationship, it often reshapes how the person who was hurt sees all future connections. It can make it hard to form new, trusting bonds, or even lead to a tendency to blame oneself or become overly cautious. Think about that betrayal spillover effect we touched on, where trust in one person, once broken, can sour your ability to trust more broadly, like a single rotten apple spoiling the whole barrel. That's a big deal. Someone betrayed by a romantic partner might find it incredibly hard to trust in new relationships. Someone cheated in business might become overly suspicious of every future collaborator. This isn't just a personal tragedy, it has an impact on society too. A society where trust is frequently and badly broken becomes a place filled with cynicism, more rules and controls, and less cooperation. It's like termites in the woodwork of a community, silently weakening the structures that hold us together. Just think about the impact of widespread political corruption or scandals in institutions people once respected. They wear away at public faith, making it harder for people to work together and feel connected. Experiencing betrayal also forces us to re-examine our own judgment. How could I not have seen it? That's a question so many ask. This self-questioning, while painful, can sometimes lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves and how people interact. It can teach us to be more discerning, to pay closer attention to red flags we might have ignored before, not out of bitterness, but out of a more mature understanding of how complex people can be, like a navigator forced to recalibrate their compass after realizing it was pointing them in the wrong direction. And stories of betrayal, like Sarah's, act as warnings. They remind us of the huge responsibility that comes with being trusted. Loyalty and honesty aren't just passive qualities, they are active choices we make every single day in how we deal with others. The consequences of failing in that responsibility, as Mark showed, can be catastrophic and long-lasting, leaving permanent scars on individuals and even communities. Ultimately, dealing with betrayal, whether it's our own or through understanding stories like Sarah's, is part of being human. It highlights the delicate balance between our deep-seated need to connect and trust, and the unfortunate truth that this trust can sometimes be met with devastating disloyalty. These experiences, no matter how painful, shape us. They can make us more guarded, yes, but perhaps also wiser, more empathetic to the pain of others, and more appreciative of genuine loyalty when we do find it. The echoes of betrayal remind us that while trust can be shattered, the human spirit, though wounded, has an amazing capacity for resilience and, eventually, for rebuilding, even if the landscape of our inner world is forever changed.